This week on Let's Talk Cabling, I'm going to answer the question about IT certifications. Welcome to the show where we tackle the tough questions that are submitted by installers, estimators, project managers, customers, and even IT personnel. We're connecting at the human level so that we can connect the world. If you're listening to this show on a podcast platform, can you please give us a 5-star rating? If it's not a 5-star rating, just shoot me an email and let me know what I can do to make it a 5-star rating. If you're watching this on YouTube, please hit the subscribe button and the bell button to be notified when new content is being produced. Because the more people we can get to, the more we can educate, encourage, and enrich in this industry. Thursday nights, 6 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Hop on any of my social media platforms, TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, YouTube, LinkedIn. I do a live stream, Ask Chuck Bowser RCDD. You get 30 minutes with me. Ask me any question that you want. Career advice, installation, certification. But I hear you, but Chuck, I'm driving home at 6 o'clock. Can't be watching my phone while I'm driving. I'll get into an accident. They're recorded, and then they're put on the www.letstalkcabling website. So you can go back and watch any one of them if you happen to miss it. So as I mentioned, we work in the low voltage industry. And a lot of our guys love getting certifications around low voltage, about cabling and installation and project management. But a lot of technicians are always looking forward, and I applaud those because you got to have a goal moving towards. Otherwise, you're just putzing through life. You got to have a goal. You got to keep working towards that goal. One of the goals you hear quite often is people saying that they want to go more into computers, hubs, routers, switches, networks, but they're not really good with computers because they've been doing cabling. So I get asked quite often, Chuck, what is the best IT certification that I can get as a beginner? I don't know. Even though I consider myself somebody who's well knowledgeable in the art of pulling, terminating, and testing copper and fiber cable, when it comes to computers, I reach out to experts. And I got just one on the show today. So today I invited just an IT girl who's on TikTok. Just an IT girl, Adreae Pohlman. How you doing? Welcome to the show.
Hi, Chuck. Thank you so much for having me here. Doing well.
It's a pleasure having you. I'm a big fan of your content. And for those who are listening to this show or watching this, make sure you go check out Just an IT Girl. You're on TikTok. Are you on Instagram as well?
TikTok and Instagram. Yep.
Very good. So make sure you go check her out and listen. She does a lot of great content. Now, I always have to start off with, you have to kind of come with a foundation so the audience knows that you know what you're talking about, right? So give us the 30-second overview of how you got to where you're at today and what kind of certifications and skills do you have?
Oh, awesome. Yeah. Hopefully I can stay within that 30-second time frame. But I actually got my start in actually high school. There were some networking classes that were available to me, and I started taking those courses. And then when I graduated high school, I joined the Air Force, and I was a 3CO, which is MOS/AFSC. The job that I went into was called computer operator. So I started my IT career path in the Air Force. Um, After the Air Force, I worked for a local county, a water and sewer department, actually in Florida. And after that, I moved up to the Washington, D.C. area, where I decided to pursue getting my education and continue my career path in IT. In some jobs, they like that whole having a degree. So I wanted to make sure I could check that checkbox off. So worked in the Washington, D.C. area, and there are a lot of federal jobs out in Washington, D.C. So I worked for the federal government, DoD, et cetera, in the networking department, in the security department, in a place called Cross Domain Solutions, and what have you. And then I had the opportunity to move to uh, the private sector. And I worked for Microsoft for a good amount of time. And now I work at a new place in manufacturing doing cloud security solution architecting. So certifications that I have uh, the A plus. I have, or I went after the A plus. It might be expired. I might have to go redo that one. I have the a lot of Azure certifications. So Azure Administrator, Azure Architect. I've gotten my Security Plus. So CompTIA has a series of certifications, and I mentioned A plus earlier, but Security Plus also falls into that CompTIA realm. I have ISC squared, CISSP. That stands for Certified Information System Security Professional, which I have kind of displayed back there. They sent it, it's in a nice little package with like a pin and
Nice.
all that nice information. They made it very fancy. But it is the creme de la creme when it comes to the security world to try and achieve, or the flagship certification. I think I've also heard it referred to as in the security world. So not 30 seconds, but that's kind of my credentials.
Very cool. Yeah, I tell people 30 seconds, not because I really expect them to hit the 30 seconds, but some people, if you don't give them a guideline, they will talk for 10 minutes. I'm one of them. If you get me talking. My boss accused me one time of being a chatty person. So you got lots of certifications. And by the way, thank you for your service to our country.
Oh yeah, thank you.
It's kind of ironic that you were in Florida and you went to DC. I'm originally from DC and moved to Florida.
Oh my
Yeah,
gosh.
I grew up in
Wow.
PG County.
Smart man though.
Yeah.
I noticed the Maryland flag, so I love it.
Absolutely. Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly right. So one of the most questions I get asked most often.
Mhm.
So you work in computers, so you're familiar with the computer guys, like I mean the cable guys like us. We come in, put in your station cable and your copper and your fiber stuff like that. A lot of the people in my side of the communications industry, they come right straight out of high school. They didn't necessarily take a computer class in high school. They mostly more likely did a some kind of a tactile class, like shop
Or
class or something
trade.
like that. Right.
Yeah.
So they got into pulling cable, and not everybody's like me. I love pulling cable. I think it's fun and it's cool. But there are some people who just they want to move on to the next step. So the most logical pathway is computers. You know,
Mhm.
go work for a company who sets up computers and laptops and puts in hubs, routers, and switches and stuff like that. But these guys don't have any idea what education or certification to get first. And I get asked this question all the time, and I don't know. I don't have any. I don't have any of those fancy acronyms that you said. Right?
Oh
So,
man.
so
Yeah.
what would you recommend to somebody who has little skills? I won't say no skills, because in today's environment, almost everybody has some skills with computers, right? Somebody who has little skills, what would be a good career path, a certification path, actually, that they should pursue?
Yeah, yeah, that's a great question, and one that I get a lot too, for people wanting to break into either IT, into tech, into computers, or even into, security. But for, I think how you describe it with the cable community, um, I think of two things. Um, One that is generic that I give any person looking to break into tech, which would be really the CompTIA certifications are pretty much a standard de facto. And it does lay out a good path to getting into tech. The top three that I typically recommend is, and this is generically not specific to cable community at this point. So get your A plus certification. The A plus is going to be more around getting familiar with computers. I remember when I took it way back in 2004, maybe 2005, 6 timeframe, early 2000s. It was basic computer troubleshooting style. They had a lot of multiple choice questions, as well as kind of drag and drop words to match definitions and what have you. And I want to say it might have become more advanced of like troubleshoot this one situation where you're actually troubleshooting in that exam on an actual computer. But so A+, I think, is a great foundational certification to get. The next one recommended, again, kind of for this holistic, how to break into IT and kind of have all the tools in your toolbox to come out and say, hey, I'm certified in these 3 different areas. The next one I would recommend is getting the CompTIA Network Plus. The Network Plus is a networking certification. So a lot around IP ranges, CIDR, setting up subnets, VLANs, and all of that of configuring networks. And then the third certification, which is pretty much, I would say, optional for both those that are wanting to just break into, it's for those, I recommend it typically that want to go down the cybersecurity path, but it is something nice to know and have as a competitive advantage would be the CompTIA Security Plus. So optional in this conversation, I would say, but still, I think it will make you competitive in the landscape, because a lot of people are looking for I guess everybody in tech or companies, I should say, rather, are looking for multifaceted people that have multiple skills. But if you're entry level, maybe it is a little bit, it might be overkill. That's what I was looking for. So I would recommend those if I was just giving just general advice to anyone, and specific to the cable folks that are looking to break into tech. Now, the other certifications that come to mind that I think make the most logical sense from cable community trying to break into the tech world. Now, I'm a firm believer in taking steps and building upon those steps, having stepping stones as you move through your career. I've always done that. I've made small steps, and I've always just built off. I took these networking classes in high school. They were called CCNA classes. And just from then, I've just moved in that one direction in IT. You don't have to go, you can change your paths. You can think of your career as chutes and ladders, if you will. You can pivot to the left, you can pivot to the right, you can move up, you can move down and change any different direction. But when I think of that, that direct path, that I think what makes most sense is to look into networking, because you do lay cables and you do have familiarity with a lot of core components when it comes to networking. Right. So highly, from that first generic kind of certification advice that we just talked about, Networking Plus, I think, would be a must have to really make your resume and credentials stand out to current employer or future employer for why you're wanting to pivot into that area. Network Plus, and also your CCNA, the Certified Cisco Networking Associate is what CCNA stands for. And that is kind of the, flagship networking certification to go after. I know I made attempts at the CCNA back in the day. I wish I would have, and I think there's going to be a question later around this, but I wish I would have known then what I know now when it comes to taking certifications and going after your goals. But I landed in more infrastructure type roles in IT. And I'm okay at networking. I think it's one of those things. IT is so vast that if you don't use it, you lose it. And since I'm not doing it on the daily, it's a little bit on the rougher side for myself. But that's what I would recommend.
Very cool. So just based on that and on what you just said, I have a couple follow-up questions. These aren't in the questions I sent to you ahead of time. So CompTIA, that's an industry organization, not a specific type of manufacturer, correct?
It's non-vendor specific,
Perfect. That's
correct?
it. So it's kind of like Big C is. So Big C is not, it's vendor neutral. So if you get your Big C technician certification, you should be able to install, Lebanon connectivity products, Pando connectivity products, Belden connectivity products.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
Industry, but not vendor specific.
Gotcha. And so my next question is, and so do you think if somebody has those certifications when employers looking at them, is that going to give them one up because they've got that A+ certification? Is that going to give them a
Yeah, I think so. I think you will be, I know in probably every community, I think security is a really good example of this, of like, I've met the the most well respected and renowned security professionals that just believe, why should I have to go take a certification? I know this material better than the people who are writing this. Um, and I mean, there is an argument of certifications not being necessary, but there is an argument. I think that for me personally, I believe there's more of an argument going after certifications than not. And I've talked about it in one of my TikToks slash Instagram posts, where it puts you on like a learning path. Two, if it's really important to put a date to the certification. Actually, a date to any goal is very important, because if you don't put a date to that goal, it's only a wish. So really making sure that you have a time frame in place. And once you have, the certification you want to go after, you have the date that you want to get certified in mind, go schedule it. And it forces you into starting to be more strategic and planning for that particular subject matter by that. So that alone, I think, is really important for setting yourself up for success, for going after that certification. But then two, I talk about also in a separate one, or separate posts, if you will, where you have to have credentials, right? You asked me in the beginning, what's my background? How do what makes you an expert in this area? And I always boil down credentials into two different things. You need either education or experience. And with, say I'm in the cabling community, I have no experience in IT. What's the fastest path to getting to pivot out of, say, cabling into more generic IT tech world, working on computers? It's going to be education. Do I want to go through a formal path or an informal path? The informal path is always going to be the quickest way. And sometimes it might even be better, because it takes your own blood, sweat, and tears and commitment to going after those, certifications typically fall in that informal path.
You mentioned about the certification thing. We get the same pushback, right? We've got guys in the field who've been pulling cable for 20 years and like, why do I need that certification? I know more than that guy who's got the certification. And the certification, if I'm an employer looking to hire somebody, and I got two people in front of me, they both have the same amount of experience, they both have the same background, and everything is equal, which is never really the case. But let's just say, for sake of argument, they're equal. And the one person has a certification and the other one doesn't. It
Yep.
doesn't mean the person with the certification is better, but what it does tell me is that person's willing to go the extra mile. And if they're
The
willing to go the extra
commitment.
mile to get that certification, thank you, Lee, if you're listening, then I know when they're on my job site, if going the extra mile is going to solve that customer's issue, that problem in one service call instead of two, that's the kind of person I want to have working for me.
That's another thing too. With, working in the federal space, there are like baseline requirements, and kind of going back to that whole credentials, you have to prove to employer that, whether with experience or with education, that you have those creds, that you're credible in that area. And so with, certifications, it's a really great way for employers to say, I have this baseline criteria. And if you can check that checkbox, you you can pass go, collect your $200. It helps employers a lot. Not that it should be the end all be all. I think, personally, I think experience trumps any certification that will ever exist. But the magic of having those two, of education and experience together, I think does set you apart from the rest. It does
Yes.
make you competitively, uh, or have a competitive advantage.
Right. Now, you mentioned both formal and informal training, right? So the informal would be the pursuit of certifications. The formal would be go to get your AA degree or your 4-year degree.
Exactly.
Which do you think is better? No, this is not specifically about somebody transitioning, but let's just say somebody who wants to get into IT, period. Not necessarily coming from cabling, but um, which do you think is better, the formal training or the path of certifications?
Yeah, that is a great question. Um, so when it comes to, I said, the path and the most logical path early and pivot points. So kind of going back to that whole thought process. Say, Chuck, you're committed, you want to move into IT now. What's going to be your best bet, to making that, I guess, move, transition? I guess it does kind of depend. Now that I think about it a little bit more, I honestly always encourage the informal path. I think that's your quickest path. I think it's, you'll probably learn a lot more because it is, that commitment relies on you and putting, that strategy together and committing to executing that strategy. Um, and there's something very gratifying, I think, about going in for a certification and passing. There's something also very, rips your heart apart when you fail that test, which I have done on many of my, certification exams. Um, but I think the quickest bang for your buck is the informal path. Now, that being said, I've done both. I got out of the military. I wanted to work in tech. I thought I had other competitive advantages that would just clearly, why wouldn't employers want to hire me right off the bat? Served in the military, had experience, had a clearance, yada, yada. But I learned very quickly that it wasn't enough. Now, one of the key ingredients that I had missing was a lot of, I had, not enough experience. Even though I had experience, I didn't have enough of that ingredient. One rule of thumb that I've heard in the past, which I don't know if I agree with or not, but they said, if you don't have a degree in the area that, employers typically like to see at least 10 years of experience in that area, which I think that's a little bit overboard, but it's this whole chicken and the egg scenario. I think that formal education, I understand that, and having gone through it, having gotten my undergrad and my graduate degree, and even I got 2 AA degrees on the path as well. There is value in having formal education. I just think that for the path of least resistance and the path that's quickest would be to do the informal path. That's not to say you won't have hurdles. Like I mentioned, I had many hurdles with my situation and why I had to go the formal path. But, I wanted to make sure that when it came to these check boxes and the opportunities that I had available to me, that I was able to have all the checks in the check boxes. So that way I could just go after the opportunities that I wanted to be available to me.
Yeah, I think it's great advice. In my personal opinion, and I have two undergrad degrees and a master's degree, and I got them because I had already had earned all my certifications for cabling and stuff, and the positions in the company I was working for at the time, to get past that glass ceiling, you had to have that piece of paper from a 4-year degree, and
You hit the nail on the
yeah,
head.
yeah.
Yeah.
And so I went and got it. And now, when again, this is just my pure opinion. People can
Yep.
agree or disagree with me. I'm almost, to me, you can make as much money with less investment with certifications.
Yeah. Yeah. Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. And I think back to like a lot of my favorite colleagues from Microsoft, big tech company. I mean, most everybody in the world knows Microsoft. And I worked with people who had no degrees. And I was just like, how the heck did you get here? Like, I wish you could have told my younger self this, that I didn't have to go through all that pain. But I think regardless so I think you can be successful without degrees. It's not a requirement. Same with certifications, not requirement. It's the experience that really sets you apart. But, again, chicken and the egg, how do you get experience if nobody's going to hire you because you don't have other credentials in that
Right.
area? So, yeah, I definitely agree with what you're saying. Is it was the glass ceiling that you had to break, and it was a requirement for me in many of my jobs.
So you talked about CompTIA and you talked about the Cisco certification. So one is a vendor neutral certification. The other is a manufacturer specific certification. Which is more beneficial to have, the vendor neutral one, or the one that's only going to work with that one manufacturer's products?
That's a good question, and almost a tough one to answer. I think when I think of the CompTIA, again, I think you're setting like this foundational level of knowledge and baseline. And not to say that the foundational is easy. It is tough to learn and achieve those certifications. But I think when it comes to buzzwords and what is respected in the field, I think even if you don't work on Cisco equipment, saying that you have a CCNA, that to me, I don't know, for when since I was 16 and hearing of these networking classes and it being you know, um, the standard de facto of equipment that is basically used in networking, it says it carries a lot of weight to say that you have the CCNA, even though it is vendor specific. I think it just depends, to be honest. I know that's a very consulted style response, but it does depend on what your objectives are and what you're going after and what you want to pivot to. I think like going back to, I think for cabling community that want to pivot into IT, networking makes the most logical step to move into. So if I think the CompTIA Networking Plus is that first great foundational step of like, let's get the baseline knowledge, and then going the extra mile then would be going after something like the CCNA. I'm not honestly sure on the networking side if there is a um, industry specific non-vendor certification for networking outside of CompTIA. So if there is, I haven't heard it. That's why I hold the CCNA to a high bar and why I think it's a great one to achieve and will reflect very well in your favor if you do get it.
So, if a lot of people who pursue these certifications, a lot of them do it on their own dime, right? So a real concern is that certification becoming obsolete.
Yes.
Is that a concern, or do they have continuing education requirements afterwards after you get your certification that keeps you current?
Yeah, I think that's a great one. And again, kind of it depends answer. Sorry for all the it depends. But I think, I know at kind of going back to the Microsoft example, I held this one particular colleague in the highest regard. And I remember he had been at Microsoft 20 plus years. And I mentioned the security certification, the CISSP, that is, flagship creme de la creme certifications to get. It really makes you have that competitive advantage in the security field. And I remember him telling me, oh yeah, I let that one expire. And to me, I'm thinking, wow, I didn't even know, because he was an Active Directory guy, so infrastructure heavy, and he just knew all the ins and outs of all Active Directory. And for him to have gotten the certification, like the CISSP, I was like really impressed. But then to hear that he let it lapse, I'm like, oh, that hurts my heart to hear, because like you could keep that competitive advantage, but he was further along in his career where he didn't see a return on investment. Um, but it's still something that if people he could keep it on his resume and just, you know, some people point out that it's, expired, and some people don't. It depends on what angle you want to slice it. But if it comes up, you just talk to employer. Yeah, I had my CSSP. I achieved, or CCNA, or whatever example of certification. It expired, and it hasn't been a requirement in recent jobs, but it is something that it still shows that you achieved it. And you know, I don't I don't think that should be a concern, I guess, is the short answer.
Yeah, just because you let it lapse doesn't mean that all of a sudden that information just left your head. You still
Exactly.
have the information.
And it
So,
still says a significant amount of information of you, that you were committed and you
right.
achieved it and you put the time in and you went that extra mile.
So this question is going to be in generalities. I know it's going to be dependent on, what company you go work for, what state, what city, and all that other stuff. But let's talk about salary, right? So somebody coming into the tech world at an entry level with an A plus, or maybe another one, are they going to make enough money to live off of?
That's a great question. And to be honest, I'm not 100% sure. Um, I'd love to think yes, but I actually don't know. I will say, when I lived in Florida, because I was thinking a lot around this question, when I was living in Florida back in 2005 timeframe, and I was working at the local county water and sewer. Now, granted, that is public sector, so who knows if that's like another factor too. But I had just gotten my first degree, an AA, associate's degree, and I got the computer technician role there. And I remember getting offered the position, and it was $15 an hour. And I remember the hiring manager saying, "I'm really sorry, this is all that we can do." And in my mind, back then, gosh, almost 15 years ago plus, I was like, "Oh, this is awesome. Like, I've never made this much money before in my life." So thinking of, even with an AA and experience, and I'm not sure if I had any certifications at that point. I was studying and going after um, some, but I mean, trying to get a reality check myself on answering this question without degrees, I think is what you said.
Right.
But would they have a certification or no?
And with the very basic of certification, like an A plus or something like that.
I think it would be reasonable to think somewhere between 15 to 20,
Right.
but I'm not 100% sure.
Right.
I think it's
So that
reasonable
that's
for those expectations, but I don't know if that's enough to live on, to be
Yeah, yeah, it
honest.
kind of depends on, do you have a family? Do you not have a family? How much you're paying for? Do you own or rent? There's a lot of variables in there. Now, I do know.
Yeah.
Now, on the flip side of that, let's talk about the maximum potential, right? I have friends who do programming. I have some friends who are like you. They got all the big certifications, and they're making well into the six figures.
Oh, yeah. Oh my gosh. The return on investment for certifications for your degree, if you decide to go down the formal path, and the return on investment for going into tech, the trajectory is insane. Like I like to say, like the world will be your the world is your oysters, because of the potential upside to going into tech. I know, just reflecting on my own career path and journey, I've been very blessed, very fortunate. And I know, it's luck is both being at the right place in the right time, but also preparation in a lot of different areas to get you to be able to execute in some of those things. So I think that, I say 10, or I said 15 to $20. And I know I was just going through Chick-fil-A. I love Chick-fil-A and they're hiring in Dallas area in case anybody's wondering. And it said $15 an hour and all these benefits. And as I was thinking about this question, I'm like, yeah, you could start out $15 an hour with the basic certification, no degrees, no experience, right? But that experience combined and over time, like that is going to multiply a lot for the individual. So I think it's definitely uh some pains, but you'll be able to get a lot of gains.
Right. Yeah. When I compare the IT industry to the cabling industry, the starting salaries for new people coming out are roughly about the same. But when you start looking at the maximum potential, I think the IT industry has a lot more potential. When you look at the cabling industry, if you get if you unless you start your own company, right? If you stay working for another company and you get all the certifications, you're looking at 70 to 110, 120, $130,000. But when you get to the IT stuff, like I said, I know one person who makes almost $200,000 a year, and
Yeah.
that's so I think the swing is better for IT. Let's shift
Yeah,
conversation. Um, because I'm a cable guy, I've dealt with a lot of IT staffs, and
yeah,
it's a male dominated world,
it
right?
is.
Um, Tell us about your battle in that kind of environment, and do you think the IT industry is getting better about having diversity in that field?
Yeah. With it being male dominated, it is, tech is male dominated. Cabling is male dominated. Uh, in law, male dominated. Doctors, male dominated. So it's there are a lot of, I guess, minorities and majorities. And this industry is majority male and minority female. Um, Along with a lot of other factors for diversity and inclusion. There are other races and etc. But from a female I guess perspective, there have been obstacles, I think, with any minority group in any situation. You're always going to face more obstacles than the majority. um, so personally, it has been uh there haven't been too many that I've had to face, but the ones that I have faced, um fortunately I was either able to steer clear of some negative situations, or I was able to get over the humps of those hurdles, I guess you could say. So, one thing that kind of comes to mind is uh, I'm a female. I'm a little bit more soft spoken and I might have a softer approach to things. I know it's quite common in certain big tech cultures to kind of be just ultra competitive and having shouting matches to argue a specific point. And so my work style doesn't really fit quite well into that. So trying to figure out how to overcome that sort of hurdle has been really interesting. Another thing that kind of comes to mind is like, and I know this happens to everyone. It just seems to, happen a lot, or I seem to observe it a lot more for women than men, or in a lot more for D&I folks or minority folks to say something, and then all of a sudden, another person in the room says the exact same thing that you said. And it's like, wait, hold up. I thought I just said that. And now I'm having my idea stolen. So just coming out and saying like, oh, Joe, I'm really happy that you agree with what I just said. And thank you for echoing what my idea, because I think it holds a lot of value too. And it means a lot that you think it holds a lot of value, like just different tactics in the workplace has been really interesting.
That's the perfect way to answer that question. I mentioned this before. My wife works for Life Labs Learning, and they teach managerial classes, and that's one of the tactics they use
Oh,
that they teach. I mean,
interesting.
yeah,
Oh,
yeah,
I
because
love
I've heard
that.
she's used that on me before. Because we're both A-type personalities, so when we're outside and we're building a project, like let's say we're putting in a water system for the chickens or something, two A-type personalities in a construction project is not a good thing sometimes.
Yeah.
And she'll say something, and either I was focused and I didn't hear, or I only half listened or whatever, and then I'll say, hey, let's do it this way, and she'll say, I just said that same thing. And I'm like, okay,
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
So she reframes it just like you just did, and that's what they call
Yeah.
reframing it. So yeah,
Oh, I
yeah,
love that.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And I'm
exactly.
sure, it just every individual is sometimes in their own head. I like to say, like, a lot of people just think in their own first person, and they're so stuck in their own head and brain that maybe they just did accidentally hear it, or maybe they, and I've been guilty of it too. I've been in situations where I'll repeat something else somebody has said, um, and didn't even realize because I was so stuck in my own head. So I do appreciate the whole reframing and
Hmm.
oh wow, I didn't even realize that I
Right.
accidentally stole your idea. Or, I am really happy that I came to that conclusion. I might not have thought I heard it, but I was working it out in my own head. And yeah, thankfully we're two smart cookies and
Yeah.
can come to the same conclusion.
So do you think the IT industry is getting better? Are you
I do.
seeing more?
I do. Um, I think in some ways it's getting a lot better. In some ways, I worry about um, some hypersensitivity, I guess.
Yeah.
Um, we're all humans. I think a lot of human beings have really good intentions. Um, and I think it's just a lot has to do with communication, and communicating and understanding where people are coming from. And with the hypersensitivity, there is a lot of hesitancy to
Yeah.
communicate, because I don't know if I'm going to offend Chuck, or Chuck doesn't know if he's going to offend Andrea. So,
Yep.
um, it so in a lot of ways, yes, we're getting a lot better, and I think there is a lot more situational awareness and appropriateness. But in the same regard, it's like we're all human beings, and it's it's nice to have open communications and be able to crack a joke and it not
Mhm.
be taken the wrong way. So,
It boils down to communications. And
yes.
anybody who's listened to my show for more than one episode, they've always heard me say, just because we work in the communications industry doesn't mean we communicate with each other.
I love that.
I say that all the time. Okay, last
Oh,
question. Last question.
mhm.
So, if you could rewind the clock back to a young 18-year-old, what would you tell yourself? What advice would you give yourself with all the hindsight and knowledge you've got now?
Yeah, I there were two things. Hopefully I can remember the two things. One was prior to our call, we were talking a little bit about, I think we were just talking about getting out there and putting ourselves out there, specifically in this format, right? On YouTube, on podcasts, on social media, and the likes. And my favorite motto, even though I know Nike has it, but just do it. Like, just go out there, do it. Things will fall into place. So not falling victim to paralysis by analysis would be the first piece of advice. The second piece of advice, we were talking about certifications a lot today. And I will be the first one to admit, like, I've failed a lot of certifications, and it is gut wrenching to go through, put that commitment in, put that time investment, my own money, and walking out of these certifications feeling like I'm a failure. Like, I remember one of the certifications I had as a requirement at Microsoft, and it was a short period of time to go after it, but there was a timeline, and I went after it, and I thought, certainly I'll get it, and I failed it. And I remember crying, feeling like I'm such a failure. And I don't cry a lot, but after that, I was like, I felt like such a failure, that I don't even deserve to be in tech anymore. Like, I should have known this, like, this is my job. And I was much harder on myself than I should have been. These exams are tricky. These certifications are tricky. The way you interpret the question and the available answers. So not to get hung up over certifications, pass or fail, like, still keep chugging at it. All the certifications that I've gotten have been worth it to me. I mean, I've gotten probably like somewhere between 5 and 10 different Microsoft certifications, and the CompTIA certifications and the ISC squared certification. So I've been through the ringer when it comes to it, and I've taken a few of them a few times. So not to get hung up on failing. Failing is good. Failing is a very important part of life, and the way you bounce back from that failure. And you can fail a few times, like you can have multiple failures of the same. Like, I failed I think one exam twice before I passed it the third time. So, like, just, it's be persistent, stick with it. Failure's okay. It would be the second piece of advice.
This is just Chuck's opinion, but I found through my life experiences, I've learned more from mistakes and pain than I have from succeeding.
100%. Yeah.
What a great conversation. Why'd we wait so long?
I know. Thank you so much for having me today, Chuck.
Oh, my pleasure. My pleasure. So, audience, please make sure you look her up on the TikTok and Instagram, Just an IT Girl. Adreae, it's a pleasure having you on the show, and I look forward to having you coming back on future shows with computer related questions that I don't know how to answer.
Oh, perfect. I can't wait. I'm looking forward to it.
Until next time, everybody, remember, knowledge is power.
That's it for this episode of today's podcast. We hope you were able to learn something. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss out on future content. Also, leave a rating so we can help even more people learn about telecommunications. Until next time, be safe.